Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of the 11 Bang Bang channel. I'm your host, Ethan Woods. And guys, we're finally getting back to it. These videos are a little spaced apart. You might say a lot spaced apart. Like, I think the last one was 2 years ago that I'd made. But we're finally getting around to episode 3 of the Handguns of Smith Wesson series. Now, what do you think the third handgun of Smith Wesson would be? We've covered the Model 1 in 22 short. We've covered the number 2 Army in 32 rimfire. Today, we're going to examine the Smith & Wesson 1.5, also in 32 rimfire. Why, you dirty, low-down cheat! Okay, guys, I'm pretty excited about this one. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. So where do we start with the history of the handguns of Smith & Wesson, the Smith & Wesson 1.5? Well, let's go back to the beginning, like I said. Short recap, 1856, the Smith & Wesson Model 1 comes out in 22 rimfire short. Smith & Wesson the Smith & Wesson Model 1 in 22 short is no powerhouse. However, there are several accounts of these things actually being lethal. So, this is still nothing to sneeze at. It is a real cartridge. Not my first choice of self-defense cartridge, but it is real. And it will work if you're in a pinch and you put a well-placed shot somewhere. So, let's talk about the gun that came after the Model 1, which honestly, I may have to do another video on eventually because this is before I got all my books to do my research on it, and I didn't have a whole lot of the history down on it. But this is the Smith & Wesson number 2. Now, the Smith & Wesson number 2 comes around in June of 1861, and it's a response to the U.S. Civil War starting up, and Smith & Wesson seeing that 22 rimfire short is not enough to put into a soldier's hands. So what they do is they come out with 32 rimfire. This one is chambered in what is called 32 rimfire long. It is a 13 grain charge, a black powder with a 110 grain bullet. It's actually pretty potent at close ranges, and this would not have been, in my opinion, one of the worst choices you could have made going into the Civil War as a sidearm. Smith & Wesson made about 77,000 of these. The reason why these really took off is because, spoiler alert for all of you Colt fanboys who like to watch History of the Handguns of Colt, it is a great series, I'll admit it. Garrett's way better at this than I am. The Colt factory is going to burn down. When that happens, smaller handgun companies are going to jump for joy because all of those Colt contracts can no longer be filled, and Colt is actually selling out some of their contracts to smaller companies to make their pistols for them. But little companies like Smith & Wesson, Star, their contracts are going to pick up to fill the void of Colt pistols. Matter of fact, there's so many pre-orders basically for the Smith & Wesson number 2 that they are back-ordered until 1867. And that is what is going to play into the history of our little handgun that we're going to have today. But first, let's talk about what else is going on at Smith & Wesson in between the years of 1861 and 1865. So let's actually backtrack to the year of 1860. We'd mentioned this before, but I can't stress how important this is to the story of the Smith & Wesson number 2 and the Smith & Wesson number 1.5. In 1860, Smith & Wesson moves from their small little factory on Market Street to a much larger plant on Stockbridge Street. This plant is actually large enough that not only can Smith & Wesson make their handguns, they can make their own ammunition. And they've got the patent on that ammunition. Because think about it, the more pistols you produce, you hold the contract for the cartridge, the more cartridges you're going to produce. And it's it's a win-win situation for Smith & Wesson. And this took off really well. So well, in fact, that by the year of 1862, Smith & Wesson had produced in a year's time 6.5 million rounds of ammunition. Yeah, not to include the pistols they're also selling to shoot that ammunition. This is equally split in between 32 rimfire and 22 rimfire or 22 short. With the exception of 416,000 rounds of 44 rimfire they were actually making for Daniel Wesson's brother, Frank Wesson's rifle. And it just got better because by the time 1863 rolls around, they're actually making closer to 8 million rounds in the year of 1863. Doesn't sound a lot by today's standards, but when you think about it, the plant on Stockbridge Street, while it was larger, that was a monumental task for them to make that much ammunition in a year. But once again, we're running into another problem. We're making so much ammunition, like I said, that plant on Stockbridge Street is larger than the one that was on Market Street. However, it's holding them up now. They are not big enough still. So what happens is Daniel Wesson and Horace Smith decide to expand even more. So what they do is they actually form a whole new company. This company is called Smith, Hall, and Farmer Ammunition Manufacturing. The directors of this company are Dexter Smith, that is Horace Smith's son, Charles Farmer, and Joe Hall. Joe Hall is actually Daniel Wesson's bookkeeper. So yes, Smith & Wesson during the years of the American Civil War is making money hand over fist. The Smith & Wesson No. 2 that they've been producing for, since 1861 to 1864 is doing quite well. But around 1862, Smith & Wesson is already planning for the future. They are going to make a bet that the Union is going to win the American Civil War, which actually pays out pretty well for them. And whenever the Civil War ends, they realize that pistols like these that are brand new aren't going to sell. The reason why? Because there's hundreds of thousands of pistols like this Colt Dragoon. There are hundreds of thousands of pistols like this, the 1860 Army, one of the best pistols of the American Civil War. And there are also 1849 pocket models. There are hundreds of thousands of revolvers floating around after the Civil War, and they know this beforehand. So, around 1862, 1863, they do start drawing up blueprints and designing a new pistol. And this new design of pistol would be for something that Smith & Wesson knew would sell better after the American Civil War than a full-sized handgun, and that is for a small, handy, compact, concealed carry pocket pistol chambered in something other than 22 short. And it is going to be called the Smith & Wesson Model 1.5. Now, why the 1.5? Well, because, like I stated, there's not going to be any more need for belt pistols for a while. Also, the Smith & Wesson Model 1, while being a very good little concealed carry gun, again, it's very low powered. So what they wanted was a little bit of a mixture of both worlds. In between 1 and 2, 1.5. There you go. And actually around 1864, they're noticing that the Civil War is starting to come to an end. And they notice that the Confederacy is losing. So by March of 1865, they turn out their new handgun. And it's a good thing too, because right after this, orders start getting canceled for the Smith & Wesson No. 2. These things were back ordered until 1867. When those back orders started shutting down, Smith & Wesson was like, okay, now we can expand to making the 1.5. Now these pistols started production, like I said, in 1865. And really, at first glance, it looks like just a scaled down version of the Model 2, or the No. 2. And for all intents and purposes, it really kind of is. It functions almost the exact same way, and I'll show you how this functions right quick. There is a latch right here on the bottom. What you do is you pull up on the latch, tip the barrel up, pull the hammer back a little bit. You can actually pull a cylinder out without pulling the hammer back, but seeing as how this pistol is over 150 years old, I don't feel very good about just dragging along the back of this cylinder. And then you will load in your 5, count them 5, not 6, 32 rimfire cartridges. Then when you go to eject your spent casings. There's that ramrod underneath the barrel that we all know and love. Now, why did they go to 5 casings instead of 6? Well, the reason is pretty simple. This is designed to be a true pocket pistol. And a 6-round cylinder. Well, actually, let me pull these out of here. A 6-round cylinder is actually quite a bit wider than a 5-round cylinder. And like I said, this gun was designed to be held and concealed in your pocket. So that is why they went to 5 instead of 6 rounds. Now let's talk about the cartridge. This gun is not actually meant to shoot the same cartridge as the number 2. This gun is actually meant to shoot 32 rimfire short. Now what's the difference between 32 rimfire short and 32 rimfire long? 32 rimfire long has 13 grains of powder. The short only holds 9. Now here's the funny thing. This pistol will perfectly handle a 32 rimfire long, and as a matter of fact, they were actually advertised that they could shoot the 32 rimfire long. However, Smith & Wesson knew what their customers were going to be. Mainly women and gamblers, people from the city, people going out west. Actually, people who had never really shot firearms a lot. So they wanted to make a very low recoil cartridge. And they did. Now let's talk about some other differences. One of the main differences that you'll notice is that we have dropped something that Smith & Wessons are kind of known for at this time period. And that is the cylinder stop that's usually on top of the handgun. Here's where I'm going to disagree with a lot of Smith & Wesson historians. I cannot find a source for why they did this, aside from the History of Smith & Wesson book, which is actually a very good book, but I have to disagree with the author slightly. He states that the top latch cylinder stop, which you can see it right here on this Model 1, was dropped because it would snag on your clothing. Now let me show you why I think that's not really the case. Because first of all, if you're going to carry this in your pocket, you're probably going to be carrying it with the hammer down. And when the hammer is down, you will see that that hammer spur actually protrudes quite a bit more than the spur. And here's the funny thing, on the 1.5, it actually protrudes more than on the 1 or the Smith & Wesson number 2. It sticks straight up in the air. So I don't think that was really the case, unless you were going to carry it in your pocket with the hammer back. I would not suggest this, considering the trigger pull on this thing is about 2 pounds. I barely touch this thing, and it goes. So, my opinion of why this was moved to the bottom for this pistol is simple. Your cylinder stop on the top all is based on a small spring in here. And it has a lot to do with this hammer splitting the spring whenever it comes down and not splitting it when it comes up. So it's a really kind of a finicky little design, and I'm not personally a big fan of it. Daniel Wesson was, me not so much. It's very finicky, it's very fragile. If you drop the gun, which happened with this one actually, not by us, but the prior owner, if you drop the gun with the hammer down, you will actually flatten that cylinder stop, causing the firearm to not work. The hammer will not drop. So I think the main reason why it was dropped for this model was it makes it more robust. Also, you leave a lot more iron up here, because this is an iron frame pistol. You leave a lot more iron up there on top of the frame to make it a little stouter. And it's actually a pretty cool thing with this one, is the fact that when you pull the hammer back, even if the spring were to break, bend, lose its temper, whatever, even if that were to happen, your finger actually is holding the cylinder stop in place. So let me show you here. See if you can see the cylinder stop move down. There you see it. And now it's locked in place. If that spring were to fail, even if it were to fail, my finger is holding that cylinder stop in place. It's actually a pretty neat design. And it's a lot more robust. This has Horace Smith's fingerprints all over it, to be quite honest. And I'm pretty sure he was the one that put this change in here. But it's not going to last for very long. We'll talk about that in a second, though. So yes, that is the differences between it and the Smith & Wesson number 2. You have a straighter hammer, shorter barrel, 5-shot cylinder, and we've moved the cylinder stop underneath the frame of the gun. So let's go into a little bit more about the manufacture of this pistol. Now remember I said we started producing these in March of 1865. However, the Civil War is still going, and Smith & Wesson is still filling out plenty of contracts with the Model 1s and the number 2s. So what they actually end up doing is they kind of outsource their major parts for this pistol to a small company called King and another small company that I'm sure nobody's ever heard of called Savage. So really this is a Savage King Smith & Wesson pistol. This is Smith & Wesson's first medium-sized revolver, and it was quite popular later on. This model not so much because, as I stated before, the American Civil War has just ended and everybody's got a pistol. So while there were 77,000 of these things produced in between the year of 1861 and the year of 1865, there's only going to be 26,300 of these pistols of the Smith & Wesson 1.5 produced. And that's in between the years of 1865 and December of 1868. In my YouTube short, I know I said 1869. It's because it's very, very close to 1869. Some of them may have actually been produced at the very first part of January of 69. So let's talk about the specs of this gun. These guns came in 3 different finishes. You could either get it in blued, as this gun was, you could get a nickel-plated version, or you could get a nickel-plated slashed blued 2-tone gun. Pretty snazzy. These guns come with a 3.5-inch barrel, and they are made out of iron. So Smith & Wesson is actually going to stick with this exact design from the years, like I said, of 1865 to late 1868, early 1869, with very few variations except for one, and that is in 1866 they're going to make 200 of these with 4-inch barrels. Now the reason why they only made 200 is because they also tried it with the number 2, but it was not very popular. And so if you see one of these with a 4-inch barrel for sale, you may want to snag that up because they are super rare. So now that we've talked about the history of this gun, let's go ahead and let's take it out to the range and do some shooting with it. Okay guys, so we are out here on the range at Woodhinge and we are going to shoot the Smith & Wesson Model 1.5. Now let me show you real quick how we load this gun. I'm going to load it up real quick, first of all, with some of these 32 Rimfire shorts. And a little disclaimer here, yes, I know my hands are dirty. I've been working today out here on the ranch. So, yeah, my hands might be dirty, my jeans might be a little dirty, but you know what? That's just all part of it. So to load the Smith & Wesson 1.5, we've kind of discussed it. It's just like all the pistols before it. You lift up on that latch, tip up the barrel, pull your cylinder out, and then place your rounds into the back of the cylinder. And like I said, I'm only shooting 2 to start off with of these 32 Rimfire shorts because they are a little hard to make and they're hard to come by for reloading components. So I'm going to shoot 2 off the bat just to see where we're even hitting at with this thing. All right, let's see if we can hit anything with it. Nope, can't two-hand it. That does shoot high. Yeah, this gun shoots a little high at that range, just a little bit. Okay, once again, now that we've shot our rounds, you can actually almost dump your empty cases out, but what you're supposed to do is actually use the ramrod on the top here. So, see if you can see it, like that, kick it off. And this is really nice if you're trying to save your brass, because you want to do that with one of these guns. Let's try some longs. We are going to go ahead and we're going to shoot some of these Smith & Wesson 32 Rimfire longs. Let me show you what those look like. Look like that right there. And these are a 110 grain bullet with 13 grains of powder. So 49 pocket model basically. Maybe a little more powerful. That actually got a little snap to them. So let's go ahead and see if we can't hit the Ghost Cowboy Bill up there. Once again, he is actually angled up, so any lead that bounces off is going to tend to go up into that hillside up there. So this is a little bit out of range for this pistol probably, but let's go ahead and give it a try. I'm not gonna lie, them are pretty snappy. There, got him. This thing hits really high though, like really high. So yeah, this thing is shooting about 10 feet high at this range. There, got him. Yeah, this thing shoots really high at that range, like insanely high. Now, Caleb has stated that that gun doesn't, or this gun right here doesn't really like these aftermarket 32 rimfires that actually have, see if I can get it focused here. They have a 22 blank in the back, and that's what I have here. Those I shot there just a second ago are actually solid, they don't have the blank in the back. Kev says these don't like to run, and I even noticed that really the regular ones were not wanting to run too well today. I don't know if it was something in the reloading process, shook the mercury fulminate loose or what, but they were not wanting to work too good. So these are actually the long version. So these ones are actually loaded with 13 grains of powder and a 90 grain wad cutter. All right, now let's see if we can't get these to go. Caleb says they don't like to go very well. They probably won't, but we'll give them a try at least. Alrighty, see if we can get it to go. Nothing. Nothing. Okay, yep, so as Caleb has stated, well, for one thing, I see what's going on. The hammer is not actually even reaching the rim on that 22 short case, or that 22 blank. So yeah, if you get one of these, you can't use the blank adapter bullets very well. Now, these actually work in the Smith & Wesson #2, but they won't work in this one. So let's go try some other stuff. So we're loaded back up with 2 of the 32 rimfire short cases, and I'm gonna try shooting at the Ghost Cowboy Bill again and see if this doesn't hit a little bit more point of aim, point of impact, because those last ones, the 13 grain charge out of this gun, are shooting really high. Still a little high, but not as bad. That one hit just about where I was aiming, but a little bit left. Okay, so yeah, the 13 grain charge out of these obviously can be done. It's actually kind of a little bit of a handful, but it can be done. However, at 25, 30 yards, you're gonna be shooting about 10 feet high, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I'm aiming under the target, and it's actually hitting over the Ghost Cowboy Bill. So before we leave, because we didn't have a whole lot of ammunition for this video, I wanna try one more thing. You know what it is. It's a certain test. So for those of you who don't know, this is a long standard tradition with Colt versus Smith & Wesson videos. This is the car table distance test. It's not really scientific, but it does tell you a thing or two about power and if there's a huge difference between handguns, such as what we saw between the Smith & Wesson Model 1 and the 49 pocket model. There was a big difference. So 32 rimfire long at car table distance. Let's see how this works. Now that is a 1 gallon milk jug, but I'd say that's actually a pretty decent hole. Let's take a look at it. Trying to get everything wet here. All right, so you can see we actually split out the back. That's not too shabby, guys. I mean, really, it's not. That's pretty all right, especially for card table distance. So yeah, 32 rimfire long at card table distance is viable. This is the 32 rimfire long. It's about a 3/4 inch overall case length. This is the 32 rimfire short. You can see it's actually only a little over 1/2 inch long case length. So it's a little shorter than that long. However, this gun will actually shoot both of them just fine, but I will admit, the long is actually kind of a little bit snappy in this pistol. All right, so now that was quite a bit of fun, and now you're gonna see probably one of the first, if not only, videos of somebody shooting a Smith & Wesson 1.5 on YouTube. Let's talk about what is going to be the competition for this gun, and that is going to be the 49 pocket model. But here's my point of why this would be better than a 49 pocket model. This gun is designed specifically to be concealed carried in a pocket. This is the size of the Model 1.5. That's the size of the 49 pocket model. The 1.5 is smaller, it is shorter, it is thinner, it is lighter, it is more of a pocket pistol in every stretch of the imagination than the 49 pocket model is. And then there are people who say, well, the 49 pocket model is more powerful. Actually, not really. I have not chronographed it. However, this gun is meant to have a 13 grain charge of powder. You can push it to the limits with 15 grains, but it's really only meant to have 13. Once you get to 15, the barrel's so short, it doesn't really help anyways. And a round ball. Now, you could put conicals in these later on, but they were originally designed for a round ball. This gun was designed to have a conical, actually a heeled bullet from the beginning, 110 grain heeled bullet, and fires 13 grains of black powder. So it's just as powerful, really, as a 49 pocket model. The pocket model may pick up a little bit more because it has about a ½ inch longer barrel. But at close ranges, I don't think it's going to matter. I think this is definitely a much greater pistol, especially considering we have self-contained cartridges and we don't have to mess around with caps and paper cartridges or loose powder and ball. This is going to be more waterproof, more pocket proof. You don't have to worry about your caps falling off in your pocket. This is the better gun versus the 49 pocket model. Now this model in particular right here, as I stated before, didn't sell near as good as the Model 1 or the number 2 Army. And like I said, the reason for that is because there's a lot of revolvers floating around after the Civil War, and everybody's just, yeah, it's not as popular. However, I can think of at least 2 people for a fact that were pretty famous in the Old West that carried these, and they used them as hideout guns. Those 2 guys are Frank James and Coleman Younger. They, for a fact, use these as their pocket pistols. That's only 2 that I can think of off the top of my head that used the first issue. But yeah, there you go. There's 2 people who use them. But the Smith & Wesson 1.5 isn't quite done yet. And neither are we. Because this is not a video with just one gun. We've got 2. So in 1868, Smith & Wesson starts to do a modernization program. They do it with all of their guns, aside from the Smith & Wesson number 2. The Smith & Wesson Model 1 has been brought into the 3rd issue, which has a fluted cylinder and some other variations. But the number 1.5 also gets a facelift. A matter of fact, there's so much of a facelift that these 2 guns are completely different from each other. I consider this a completely separate revolver. But that's another thing we're going to talk about. Why do these both share the same name, even though they are very obviously completely different? Well, the reason for that is that Smith & Wesson has taken the names and they're actually using them for frame sizes. So a number 1 frame is a very small 22 short. A number 2 frame, which we're going to see some more of coming up, is a kind of a belt-sized pistol, and the 1.5 is a pocket pistol that is with a more powerful cartridge than the Model 1. Now, while us collectors call these 1.5 second issues, the Smith & Wesson factory back in the day just called it the new Model 1.5. Now let's talk about some of the changes between this and the first issue. First thing you're going to notice is we now have a rounded barrel instead of that flat slab-sided barrel on the first issue. We also have a bird's head grip. Now, I'm going to be the first one to tell you I'm not the world's biggest fan of this grip. The reason why, because on the 1.5, I can actually get a 3-fingered grip on this gun. I can hold it quite well and get a very good grip on the gun when I'm shooting it. This bird's head grip, though, I can only get 2 fingers on the gun. I'm not a big fan of that. I can get that. No, I can't even get that pinky on there. So, yeah. This is what you get with the 1.5 second issue. Now there is an advantage to this. It makes it much more easy for bringing out of your pocket and everything else. It does kind of feel okay, but I don't know. I just prefer that square butt on the first issue. And for me, the most glaring difference, and one I'm definitely not a fan of, evidently, as much as I love him, Daniel Wesson had the affection for the top latch because it's back up there again. I don't really know why, but they decided that was the way to go, and, well, I mean, more power to them. Personally, between these two pistols, I prefer the first issue. If I was going to have a concealed carry gun in the 1860s, even into the early 1870s, I'm going with the Smith & Wesson 1.5 first issue. I'm not as big of a fan of this gun. I'm sorry. We also got the more curved down trigger, or excuse me, hammer spur. As you can see, the 1.5 first issue has a straight up and down hammer spur. This one kind of leans more towards the back. Now, here's where I'm going to get into what I actually would consider one of my dream guns. I really, really, really want one. Unfortunately, they're a little bit rare. So now, remember I had stated that Savage and King were tasked with making large parts for the Smith & Wesson Model 1.5. Those large parts were included the barrel and the cylinder. Now, here's the funny thing. So by the time Smith & Wesson makes the first 1,000 of these guns, or starts producing them, Savage and King is still producing parts for them. Barrels and cylinders, mainly. And there's a bit of a miscommunication, and the first 1,500 orders for parts from Savage and King for the Smith & Wesson 1.5 second issue turn out to be Smith & Wesson 1.5 first issue barrels and cylinders. Whoopsie daisy! Now, this is 1868. The country is actually in a recession. There's a lot of turmoil going on. Smith & Wesson does a very, very smart move with these right here. They immediately tell them to send the parts. They tell Savage and King to send the parts to Springfield because they're just having trouble producing them where they're at. And a special frame is made for these parts. And what you get is what is known as, or at least at the time, as the Smith & Wesson 1.5 Mongrel. I want a Mongrel so bad. I look on Gunbroker all the time. If any of you guys find a Smith & Wesson 1.5 Mongrel for sale, snatch it up. If you don't snatch it up, at least let me know where it's at and I'll snatch it up. The way you can tell the Mongrel is the fact that it has that big old slab-sided barrel and the non-fluted cylinder. But it has a bird's head grip, and the frame kind of looks more like a second issue. So yes, by all means, keep your eyes out for those because they are really rare. They only made 650 of them, and I really want one. I'll never own one, but I want one. Now, modern collectors, and when I say modern, I mean modern as in the 1950s, decided Mongrel was a little crude, so they call them transition models. They're not transition models. They are built from the ground up as their own thing, and I personally find Mongrel just a little more fitting. But here's the funny thing. We actually have the daybook records of these Mongrel pistols being sold. And it goes as follows. March 17th, 1869, 50 were sent to C.W. May for sale in Japan. Number 2, the second order. April 19th, 1869, 200 of them were sent to J.W. Stores of New York City. And the third order came May 17th, 1869. 400 of them were sent to, again, C.W. May for sale in France. These revolvers are found in the serial range from 27,200 to 28,800, and they are mixed in with the new model 1.5s within the same range. The only really real variation in the Smith & Wesson model 1.5 second issue was they made 1,000 of them with 2.5-inch barrels. Once again, it was just kind of like the 4-inch barrel thing. It didn't really take off, so they only made 1,000 of those. Now, like I said, the Smith & Wesson Model 1.5 first issue was kind of a failure. These things are actually pretty expensive and kind of rare. Like I said, they only made approximately 26,300 of these pistols. What I find funny is this one was either made in December of 68 or January of 69, because this pistol right here is serial number 26,240. This is within 100 pistols, most likely, of being the last Smith & Wesson 1.5 first issue to be rolled off the assembly line. That's kind of cool. I don't care who you are. I know people like the early generation, but also really late generations are pretty awesome too. But whereas the 1.5 first issue was kind of a failure, this one was definitely not. These ones were made until 1875. And between the years of 1869 to 1875, They made and sold 108,000 of this little guy. So while just a little bit short of the Model 1, that's actually pretty decent for a company like Smith & Wesson because they're also selling the cartridges. I might also mention that the French government actually ordered 3,895 of these for purposes I'm not quite sure of, but these were used by the French government. Now, why do we see that Smith & Wesson drops this pistol right here? For all intents and purposes, it was very popular out west. I mean, like I said, we saw 108,000 of them were produced in 7 years and sold like hotcakes. The reason why is because Smith & Wesson eventually loses the roll and white patent. Now Colt is producing guns like the Single Action Army, the Cloverleaf. They're producing the New Line pistol, all these guns with bored through cylinders. And Smith & Wesson is saying to themselves, we've really got to come up with something that is going to give them a run for their money, because this bored through cylinder thing is no longer new. Everybody and their brother is making cartridge guns. We need to do something new. And they completely get rid of the tip-up design. Thank heavens. I'm sorry. These guns are fun to shoot, but there is a huge weakness in this gun, and that is this tip-up design. Which, as you can see, I don't know if I mentioned it, but this one works pretty much the same as the 1.5 before it, and the number 2 in the Model 1. All the Smith & Wesson guns up to this point are working the same way, as a tip-up gun. And you may notice that we didn't take this one to the range and shoot it, and there's a very good reason for that, because, like I said, these guns have issues. Look at the barrel. See how much that moves? Now, this one has a little play, but it's not near as much as this one, and that is because, I don't know if you can tell it here, but that hinge pin has worn out the iron around it. And so this gun is not safe to shoot. If I could find somebody to weld that up and repair it, I probably would, but for now, this is just a wall hanger, basically. And this is a major problem. So Smith & Wesson needs to find out something quick to replace this idea, and they start working on it, ironically, when this gun is being produced, when it's first started to be produced. But it's not for something that's small. It's for something that's a little bigger. Because the Civil War's been over for 5 years now. Economy's starting to get back on track. People are moving out west. And Smith & Wesson has not really came up with a big bore handgun yet. That is until this bad boy is going to come up on the scene. Oh, I can't wait for this video. We got some work to do on this one. It's not in 100% working condition right now. We've got to get some more reloading supplies for it. But Smith & Wesson's going to come back with a bang in 1869. Oh man, I'm so excited for this one. And we no longer have a tip up in the front. Look at that. Oh! We're starting to get into my favorite Smith & Wesson right here, guys. One of my favorites. But that's a story for another day. Hopefully it's not in a year or two from now. So in conclusion, what are my thoughts on the Smith & Wesson 1.5 first issue and the 1.5 second issue? From the years of 1865 until the year of probably 1870, I would say you could not do better for a concealed carry gun. The Colt Cloverleaf is going to be the one that, in my opinion, is better than this for a concealed carry gun, but this one's pretty good. And even then, the Cloverleaf is just quicker to reload. However, I think that this gun, it really fits a very good niche. Because it's concealable. You really only need 5 shots for a concealed carry pistol, let's be honest. And reloading is going to be something you do in your spare time if you don't get killed when you have to use it. Out of these two pistols, I personally prefer the first issue. I like the squared butt better. I like the cylinder stop on the bottom of the frame better. This one's the better gun. This one was designed to be more pretty, designed to sell to people because of the looks mainly, I think. I mean, it still would definitely be a very good gun, but I don't like the bird's head grip. So there you are. Until the Colt Cloverleaf comes along, and even then, this is going to be the best concealed carry gun. So yeah, guys, that's about all I got for you today. So as always, thank you for watching. Trust in God, and keep your powder dry. Bye.